Silence on stands. Please be seated.
Thank you, Your Honour. Father, there's just a couple of matters I want to take you to in one of your statements. Unless you need me to, I won't put it up on the screen. The first is paragraph 56. You noted that Father Peter's letter was dated the 11th of September, some 8 days after the meeting and the day after your telephone conversation with Bishop Manning. You generally...
Yes, could you just... so I just can see it? What?
Oh, certainly. We'll have it up on the screen.
No, just if you tell me the tab, I can...
Tab 320 and it's paragraph 56. And perhaps we should have it up on the screen as well.
Right.
Do you have it? And so you say there that you note that the letter was dated 11th of September, some 8 days after the meeting and the day after your telephone conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Are you suggesting there that because the letter was some 8 days later, that makes it less reliable than otherwise?
No. What would have been in my mind when I made that statement was that this was not a verbatim report on the meeting, you know.
Well, it didn't say it was.
No, I didn't say it was, but 8 days later, it's probably difficult to remember everything, that's all.
What about 20 years later, Father?
Of course it is difficult to remember all the details 20 years
and
later.
And 8 days later is far more reliable than 20 years, isn't it?
Sometimes. Not always.
Sometimes.
Not always. Oh, it's probably, in theory, it is.
In theory, but if you say not in this case.
Well, it depends what you're trying to remember. If you're trying to remember, you know, specific details, yes, of course, a more recent memory is much more reliable. Big issues, you don't forget.
Thank you. Now, the next paragraph, you make the comment that the letter was written on the letterhead of the tribunal and signed by Wayne Peters as judicial vicar. Now, that was his position, wasn't it, judicial vicar?
Was.
And that was the letterhead that was available to him as...
That's correct.
And he was sent as a representative of the bishop.
That's correct.
And he was sent as a representative of the bishop relevant to his position within the diocese.
That's correct.
So there's nothing remarkable about him having written it on that letterhead, is there?
Not really. He later became the Vicar General, but he was still writing on the tribunal letterhead, but I wouldn't like to make a big issue of that, no.
Thank you. Now, the three of you met on a second occasion. That's right?
Yes.
And that was on the 24th of September. That's right? And you were all present at that meeting, I think, weren't you?
Yes.
Now,
could I just say,
certainly.
In studying my diary, there was a second meeting, and my diary indicates that I was absent.
That's the 12th of October, I think you're referring to?
I think so, yes.
Can I ask you to assume that Farrell didn't turn up?
I can assume that. If I wasn't there, I wouldn't know that, yes.
Thank you. That hasn't come to your attention more recently, that Farrell didn't turn up to the 12th of October?
Yes, I read that in a document somewhere.
And you don't doubt, do you, that there was no meeting on the 12th of October? Without you?
No, I don't. I presume a meeting took place, but Farrell didn't arrive or something.
So you're assuming a meeting took place without Farrell, but with who?
I presume Brian and Wayne were there. Look, I'm sorry, I don't know. I wasn't there.
So you're not suggesting that there was a meeting at which you weren't present and something relevant to these events took place?
No, I'm not suggesting that at all.
Thank you. Now, there were two reports back to Bishop Manning, one from Father Peters and one from Father Lucas.
Yes.
Perhaps if we can turn to Father Lucas's first, which is behind tab 167. Now, that's dated the 25th of September. Do you have that?
Yes. No. 167. I'm sorry. Thanks, Mr. Nurse. Yes, I'm right now.
Thank you. Now, his letter refers to a document which was attached and indicates that the basis for the discussion with Father Farrell, as he then was the points of discussion.
Yes.
And if you turn over the page, and if we have the next document on the screen, do you see that's the points of discussion?
That's correct.
And that was discussed at the second meeting, the 24th of September
That's
meeting.
correct.
And you see that the first paragraph indicates that for reasons previously explained and taking into account all the circumstances, there's no possibility of an appointment at this stage.
Yes.
So that was fairly emphatic, wasn't it?
It is emphatic.
And it was certainly your view by the second meeting that he shouldn't get another appointment.
At this stage.
So you thought there was still a prospect?
Because I didn't know about any crime at that stage, but that's, that's my position.
I thought your view in 1990 was he shouldn't ever get a position.
No, after not be considered until after he went into therapy, you might recall.
And your view from the first meeting was that he was much worse. The first meeting in September, your view from the September meeting was that he was much worse than in the 1990 meeting.
Yeah, more full of himself, more saying I'm right and everyone else is wrong and all that sort of strange behaviour.
Thank you. And if we can then just go further down, you see there's 7 steps recommended under paragraph 5.
Yes, 5.1 to 5.7.
Yes, so that's all your recollection of what was discussed at that meeting.
That's correct.
And it's the case from your recollection that Farrell responded to some, perhaps not all of them, with his position.
That's correct.
Now, coming back to the letter, which is the document that's on the reverse side of that.
Yes, Father Lucas's letter.
And did you see this letter before it went?
No, I don't think I did.
You've had a chance to read it recently?
Yes.
And you accept what Father Lucas said as a reasonable summation of the meeting?
Yeah, I think so. Yes.
Thank you.
I don't have any major dispute except when Brian says John Farrell that he indicated that he's not adverse. Well, there were a lot of reservations in Farrell's head, but generally he was prepared to think about it and go along with it.
Well, that's in quotation marks, isn't it?
It is, yes. I'm sorry, I'm probably being pedantic, that's all. Sorry.
But he was not averse to various matters, perhaps not every matter.
That's exactly what I'm trying to say. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Now, just turning to tab 171. This is Father Peter's account of that meeting.
Yes.
And you see that it's on tribunal letterhead.
Yes.
And signed as judicial vicar.
Yes.
And there's no inferences that should be drawn from that in respect of the reliability of that.
No, not at all.
Now, just going down that letter, you accept the first paragraph was an accurate account of what was happening?
Yes.
As the second paragraph?
correct.
And you accept that Father Lucas took the discussion through the various points that I've taken you to already?
Well, that is true, except that was not... it reads as if that's where we started the meeting. That was way later in the meeting, in this 2-hour meeting. It reads as if this is where Brian started. He didn't start there.
Where did he start?
Oh, we started by asking Farrell, how are you? I was interested in asking how his therapy had gone with Dr. Blazinski. What have you been doing? Those sorts of questions, very broad range. But this was not the opening gambit of that meeting.
No, but the point of the meeting was to go through those various points, wasn't it?
You're talking about the first meeting or the second meeting?
This is the second meeting.
Oh, the second meeting, yes. I'm sorry, I was confused.
Were you talking then about the first meeting?
I was, I'm sorry, yes.
Let's leave that to one side, come back again to this document.
Yes, this was the point of the second meeting.
And it's the case, isn't it, that the second meeting went through each of those dot points I've already taken you to?
You're correct, that's correct.
And that was the purpose of the meeting?
That's correct.
And you accept that the account that's set out here by Father Peters, albeit being a summary of a meeting that took some hours, 2.5 hours, is...
Are you talking about the second meeting?
Yes, we're only talking about the second meeting.
That didn't take 2 hours.
Well, if you look at the beginning of the letter, the second paragraph says it began at 7:30 p.m. Do you see that?
I see that.
And the last paragraph said it closed at 10 p.m.
I think there's a little bit of confusion. I mean, that's the time frame of the first meeting. It's not my recollection that's the time frame of the second meeting, but I'm prepared to accept this letter may be correct, but that's not my recollection.
Well, you'll see at the end of this letter there's reference to the meeting adjourning for a break at about 9:30. It's on the last page.
Yes, yes.
So that makes it a somewhat shorter meeting, less than 2 hours.
Yeah, sure. I just think Wayne's a little bit confused. I'm not saying it doesn't anything to discredit some of the things he says here, but it is. I think there's a little confusion in his mind about the first meeting and the second meeting.
Well, how long do you say the second meeting went for?
Well, certainly not for 2 hours.
Less than 2 hours?
Oh, yeah, I think so. But does it matter?
Well, it matters to you, clearly, Father.
Oh, it does. It matters to me. I'm just challenging the fact that I don't think it was that long a meeting.
Father, you're giving us a recollection 24 years after the event, aren't you?
Oh, that's right, Your Honour.
This letter was written 4 days after the event.
That's correct.
Do you think that the letter might be more accurate?
That is possible. But I'm just, as you just said, and rightly so, I'm trying to recollect what happened 24 years ago.
That's hard for any of us.
Absolutely right. I don't see why it's that substantial. I'm just saying that that's not quite my recollection. That's all. Does it, Ms. Finnis, does it matter?
Well, you've raised it, Father, so as I say, it clearly matters to you.
Oh, okay.
You're not suggesting that your different recollection of the timing than Father Peters, some month after the event, is more reliable, are you?
No, I'm not suggesting about that matter, no. There's some other matters in his letter that I would challenge.
Well, coming back to the first page, he refers to little or no discussion on the first 2 points. That's right, isn't it?
Yes, yes, I think that's correct.
And then in relation to the third point, which was the application for laicization, Farrell was effectively opposed to that, wasn't he?
Yes.
And no doubt he said it in emphatic terms.
What he was, again, this is my recollection, but I'm much more certain about this than timeframes. He was concerned that if he was not a priest in the future, then all of the talk and rumours about him would be vindicated. People would say, "Oh, that's right. What we thought about him, what we've been saying about him, must be true because he's now being stood down." That seemed to be his objection.
Well, that's a rational point of view, isn't it?
Oh, certainly, yes.
Now, coming back to the letter, there is discussion in relation to 5.2, in relation to the full-time secular employment.
Yes.
And that's similar to what you've just said. He was concerned about the impression of being outside the priesthood.
That's correct.
Then you continue over to the next page. He was not happy with Dr. Blasinski.
That's correct.
For the first time is spelled correctly.
Yes.
And you remember him telling you he wasn't happy with Dr. Blasinski.
In both meetings.
Thank you. And then coming down...
in fact, he was much stronger than what's written here. You know, his dissatisfaction or complaints about the doctor were much stronger than what's written here.
Coming down to the bottom of that page, do you see that last paragraph where it said it was hard to ascertain just what emotions were going on in Farrell? He seemed to act in a calm and businesslike manner throughout. That's consistent with how he appeared in that second meeting.
The second meeting, yes.
Very different, as you would say, from the first meeting.
From the first meeting.
So he'd had some sort of epiphany between the first and second meeting, Farrell?
I don't think so. I think he had calculated that this is a meeting which he must present much more rationally at.
So it follows from
that was my estimation and still is my assessment.
So it follows from that he was equally calculated in the first meeting, although with a different result.
Yes.
Coming over to the next page, the top of the page, a couple of occasions there were small indications he was perhaps beginning to appreciate the difficult position he was in.
Yes.
That was the impression you had as well?
Oh, I think so.
Well,
yes.
I think all the words are, in some way, the very difficult position. His actions of the past. You understand that?
I do understand that.
That's talking about what he's done in the past, isn't it?
Yes. Well, what actions have been referred to, I don't know.
Well, that perhaps is the question, but nevertheless, you agree that he was concerned that his actions had consequences.
Yes, actions, behaviour, whatever. I'm not going to dispute it, Your Honour.
Now, that sentence continues. A difficult position in the actions of the past have placed him, number one, and you've answered some questions in relation to that. And the second was those offended against. Do you see that?
Well, I think the second was his bishop, wasn't it?
His bishop, have placed him, his bishop, and those offended against.
Could you just bring me to it?
Certainly. This is the first sentence in the top paragraph on the last page.
Beginning to appreciate in some way.
Well, let's start at the beginning then. On a couple of occasions, there were some small indications that Father Farrell is perhaps beginning to appreciate in some way the very difficult position his actions of the past have placed him, his bishop.
I'm sorry.
So there's a comma
to
between.
Beginning to appreciate in some way the very difficult position his actions of the past have placed him, his bishop, those offended against the priesthood and the church. Yes.
So the difficult position was in respect of each of those. Did you understand that?
I understood that, yes.
And you were asked what his actions meant, And coming down further in that sentence, it refers to those offended against.
Yes.
You see that? So clearly, by the time of this letter, there was a discussion about those offended against. Is that right?
Look, even way back then, my prime concern in any of these matters was the victims of any abuse that took place. So if anything had have happened, then victims should have been our prime concern, not the what's he say, the
priesthood and the church.
Not the priesthood and the church or the bishop, but victims should be first. That was always my... I don't know, but I suspect I might have pushed him a bit on that.
So there is clearly reference to his victims in this paragraph.
Yeah, I mean, I would have pushed the fact that when these things happen, the most important persons to think about are victims.
And
that's how that would have got in there.
So that's reflected in this paragraph, albeit at a lower level than perhaps you would have put. You would have put the victims perhaps before him and his bishop.
I would have... Look, as His Honour's been saying, I'm recalling 25 years ago. But I do know from other things that I said and wrote back in those years that when we're considering the matter of sexual assault by a member of an institution that we call the church, I used to keep saying, we've got to put the victims first. Now, I probably gave a little speech like that at this meeting, and that's what I presume, how that got into this discussion.
Because it was the case that what you were considering in relation to Farrell was the matter of sexual assault by, as he was a member of the institution.
Anyone.
But in relation, you said you would have said something like that, a little speech like that at this meeting, and you said a speech like that, that is, the matter of sexual assault by a member of an institution that we call the church, because that applied to Farrell.
No, not because it applied to Farrell. Look, you're right, Your Honour. I'm trying to recall what would have happened 25 years ago. I would have made said a little statement like that, not just for Farrell, but for the other two, because there was in those days, and there still is in some places today, an inclination to handle these matters as if we're looking after the church or the institution, because it applies to other professions too.
Well, I accept what you say, Father. You were seeking to ensure that the others at the meeting, Farrell...
and, Your Honour, you're absolutely right. I'm recalling this 25 years later, that's the sort of thing I would have done.
Yeah, indeed. But even so, the assumption in that, as counsel's putting to you, is that Farrell had offended and there were victims.
I can't deny what you're saying.
No.
Except that my recollection, and I agree with what you're saying, but my recollection, if you had offended or if anyone had offended, this is what happens. That's all I can say.
Yeah. And what counsel's putting to you here is that Father Peters has recorded what appeared to be the state of mind of Farrell at this meeting, and that is that he was coming to appreciate, amongst other things, the impact that his actions had had on those who he had offended against.
I do understand that's what Wayne is writing there.
And the assumption in that is that all of you understood that Farrell was accepting he had offended against some people.
Yes, I accept that that's an assumption. But I just have a different recollection. And Your Honour, your comment about a 25-year recollection is not as reliable as a more contemporaneous one.
And what is here is a more contemporaneous one.
That's correct, yes.
Now, I think you made a note in your diary after this meeting. That's right?
I believe so.
And that's at perhaps tab 166, if you could have a look at that, Father, and if that can go on the screen.
Seven-point plan was presented to John following CSA Rees.
So that's 7:30 p.m. on the 24th. That's when the meeting started, isn't it?
Yes.
Met with John Farrell, Brian Lucas and Wayne Peters. A 7-point plan was presented to John following CSA re his laicization.
Re his laicization.
Now, CSA means child sexual assault, doesn't it?
It does, yes.
And that was a short form that you used frequently.
That's right, and even up until recent times, I would say I'm going to a CSA meeting. That didn't mean I was going, had made an assumption that any crimes had been committed. I just used to describe these meetings as CSA meetings.
Because it was about child sexual assault, wasn't it?
Pardon?
The meeting was about child sexual assault.
That was, yes, it was to determine whether child sexual assault had occurred.
Well, it wasn't about determining whether it occurred, was it? You couldn't determine whether it occurred, could you, Father, at the meeting?
No, well, of course not, but maybe he could have made some admissions that gave us a strong indication that it occurred.
He did, didn't he?
No, I don't believe so. That's my point.
Now, I think you've given different versions as to what this entry means. You've told us now that CSA means child sexual assault. That's right.
Yes.
And you've said to us that child sexual assault was there because that's what you said in relation to these meetings that you went with priests and clergy.
Yes.
Because these meetings these meetings invariably were in relation to a priest or brother in circumstances where there was a knowledge or belief that they had misconducted themselves sexually with children, and the purpose of the meeting was to move them out of the priesthood or order.
The purpose of the meeting might be to ascertain whether it had occurred or not.
You weren't investigators, Father.
No, but
your job was to find out whether or not the man needed treatment and to make that happen.
And could he return to ministry? Yes.
That's right, and could he return to ministry? Father Lucas's job was to try and persuade him that it was best for all if he resigned. That's right?
I'm not sure. If Brian said that, that's what he had in mind.
Well, the 7-point plan was all designed to get him out, wasn't it?
It was also designed to get him therapy.
Certainly, but therapy and get him out.
Well, didn't it say that he would not be considered for a reappointment until a positive outcome of the therapy?
The point of your note is that a 7-point plan was provided or presented to John following CSA re his laicization.
Absolutely.
Couldn't be clearer than that, could it? That was the point of the meeting.
Could I just go back?
Certainly.
This is, as I said, I think yesterday, these little notes are aid to memoirs for me. They are not file notes or anything more for me to try and remember what the meeting was about. That's all.
And what this tells you the meeting was about was that you presented a 7-point plan. It was about child sexual assault and it was heading towards his laicization.
That's correct, except that there were many things in the 7-point plan, which I mentioned there, other than the laicization question.
Certainly, but clearly, as an aid memoir, the laicization was significant enough for you to put it in there.
I'll accept
that. Now, following CSA clearly means following there having been a view that in fact he had committed child sexual assault. Is that right?
Well, I don't believe that. I think it means following a CSA meeting, which was the previous meeting. And that's all I can say, Ms Vanessa.
Even though the word meeting doesn't appear there.
Even though it doesn't appear.
Now, you told Mr Whitlam in relation to this entry that you didn't know what it meant. Now, do you remember telling him that?
I don't, but I did read the
Perhaps
transcript.
we can have that up on the screen. It's tab 8. Thank you.
In the Whitlam bundle?
Yes, it's behind tab 8, Father.
Page.
Page 29, Your Honour.
I'm sorry, am I looking at the
We'll
Whitlam?
help you, Father.
Tab 8? Right.
Page 29.
Page 29. Thanks very much.
Do you have that?
Yes.
Now, at the top of that page, there's reference to Annexure 7, and you can assume, Father, that Annexure 7 is the note we've just been speaking about. And it's noted to you that you use the expression CSA, and it was put to you that would that mean that he did admit to an assault? Your response, I can't answer that. And then Mr Whitlam says it's conceivable with what you said earlier that it would. You see that there?
Yes, please.
Now, you said you realised that. Yes?
Yes, yes.
And that's because you had earlier said to him what your understanding was in relation to Wayne's first letter, didn't you?
Yes.
Perhaps we can go back to that, which is on page 18. And it's at line 18 on page 18.
Yes.
Now, your answer begins with, you'd met him before and we were talking to a man who was quite crazy and difficult to understand.
Yes.
Now, and you say, I'm sure we asked him what it was that he had been accused of, not what he had done because the court case was over, but what he had been accused of, and he went on and on and on.
Yes.
Telling you what he'd been accused of.
Yes.
And then you say, now I can understand how Wayne might write something like this in the light of what Farrell said, but I don't recall him mentioning any names of people.
Yes.
Now, Father Peters didn't mention any names of people in his letter, did he?
No, I'm not talking about Wayne mentioning names of people. I'm talking about Farrell mentioning names of people.
That's right, but there was nothing in Father Peters' letter
no,
that suggested that Farrell had mentioned names
quite
of
correct.
people. And you say that you don't recall him mentioning any places. That's right, but he did refer to Moree, didn't he?
In relation to because that's what we asked him about, what he'd been accused of.
The place Moree was clearly mentioned.
I think so, yes.
And Moree appears in Father Peters' first letter, doesn't it?
Yes.
Father, if you're going to a meeting to talk to a priest about allegations of child sexual assault, be it Farrell or be it anyone else,
Yes.
why wouldn't you ask the priest what they'd done?
Well, you would. You would.
Well, you told Mr Whitlam that you didn't.
But we knew what he'd been accused of. I didn't.
Well, why didn't you ask him what he'd done?
Well, we did ask him what he's done. In other words, what had the police and other people in the town accused him of?
Yeah. Well, mate, that's what he's been accused of. Why didn't you ask him what he'd done?
Well, he was telling us that he was telling us that he'd been to court. The matter had not proceeded. I thought it had been acquitted, and this is what I'd been accused of. That may have well been what he did, but he was saying, I've been vindicated.
But why didn't you ask him what he had done?
with respect. I think that's what that discussion was about. He was telling us what he was accused of, but he was saying he had been, in other words, he was saying, I did nothing because I've been vindicated. Do you follow?
No, I'm not sure I follow. You accept that there are other rumours around about him?
Yes.
Did you ask him whether any of those rumours were true?
The only rumours that were around about him were rumours that he told us about. I had no access to any other information at the time.
I mean, when you go and talk to a priest, not Father Farrell, but another priest, about allegations of child sexual assault, do you ask them what they've done?
Look, in nearly every case I've ever dealt with over those whole long years, I already knew what they've done because the matter had already been reported to me or to someone else by one of the most unfortunate victims of that person, or by the police. In this case, I wasn't aware of any victims or any victims' whereabouts, and none of them had spoken to me, and I thought they hadn't spoken to Brian Lucas either.
But in those other cases, do you ask the priest what they have done?
By the time I speak to them, I know what they've done.
Well,
but I can't.
But don't you ask them, well, look, it said you've done this, did you do it?
Oh, yes, yes.
You ask them that question?
Yes, yes.
Because you want to know what they've done, don't you?
Yeah, I've got, I can't ask those sorts of questions if a police investigation...
Well, leave aside the police.
Yeah, that's all right, as long as you appreciate that.
Yeah, well, leave that to one side.
There's limits to what you can ask.
But
sometimes.
If you've had a victim come to you, you then get the priest, you sit the priest down to discuss child sexual assault, do you ask the priest, what have you done?
Yes, may I give you an example?
Well, firstly, do you ask them that question?
Yes, yes. You want me to go on?
Yeah.
As recently as a couple of years ago, a priest, I had met with some victims. They had made some allegations against a priest. We reported the matter to the police, but we called him in, myself and Mr. Michael Salmon, and we put the question to him. This is what these people said about you. Is this true? He said yes. I then told the police that this man has made an admission to me. What I didn't know was that there were a whole host of other victims out there, and the police found that out. I was only dealing with one victim at the time. That's just an example of how it worked. And look, I'd be the first to admit that the Catholic Church has not got this right yet. That's what I can say.
Now you continue on in the next part of your answer to say again that, and perhaps if we can scroll down to the next answer. Again, you said, in a sense, Wayne's letter makes a bit of sense, but in your judgment, they weren't admissions. That's right. Then coming back to page 29, you accepted with Mr. Whitlam that it was conceivable that your use of the expression CSA in that context of your note meant that he did admit to an assault. You accepted to him that was conceivable.
Yes, conceivable, yes.
If we can move further down, you're asked further about that note, and you say that it's just a very cryptic note. If we can scroll further down. And at line 42, you say, look, I honestly don't recall what that means. Now, there's no doubt what it meant, is there?
Not in my mind.
Why didn't you tell Mr. Whitlam that?
Well, I knew what it meant. The term CSA means child sexual assault. What I'm probably saying to Mr. Whitlam, Ms Vanessa, I can't say any more. I don't think. I can't be more honest than that.
More honest than saying nothing more.
I don't recall why I said that.
The witness really has to be taken to that whole answer, because I'm not sure it's been accurately put so far. There is a bit more to that answer, and I don't want to say any more about it, but in fairness, it should be shown to the witness.
My friend can put the whole...
I don't think that's right, but as Ms Vanessa says, you can ask questions if you wish to later.
Well, Your Honour, it's not a matter for...
I'm going to allow the question.
Please, the Commission.
Now, can I just turn to what you said to the police this year? I've taken you to that before. It's tab 333, Father. Have you got that? It's paragraph 19 towards the end of the statement.
Yes.
Do you have that?
Yes, I have it.
And that's in relation to the diary entry we've been speaking of.
Yes.
And you note that the note makes reference to Farrell's laicization because of child sexual assault offences. So it's the case, isn't it, that at that meeting there was reference to Farrell and his child sexual assault offences, and that was leading to laicization.
Is that said there somewhere? Sorry.
Well, you can read what it says. It says the note makes reference...
The note makes reference to Farrell's laicization because of child sexual assault offences. In my mind, I was referring to the matters for which Farrell had already been to court.
Now, he had been to court in respect of one or more offences against one boy,
Yes,
and
that
those
was my
charges
understanding.
had been dismissed.
And that's what he told us.
And so what you're saying now is the reference to CSA, firstly, is a reference to a child sexual assault offence?
No, yeah, well, it's a reference to what he told us he had been accused of. That's what I'm trying to say, I think.
Well, you say in your mind you're referring to the matters for which Farrell had already been to court for. That's right?
That's correct.
Now, that's not something you told Mr Whitlam some 4 years previously.
I appreciate that. I mean, I've got no explanation for that, Ms Vanessa.
For the fact that we've got 3 different accounts as to what that file note means.
Yes, I'm only human and I made some different comments on it.
And this, of course, is the most recent.
That's the most recent, yes.
Now, there was a third meeting in relation to Father Farrell in November.
Yes.
You were present at that meeting.
I understand I was, yes.
In fact, you were all present, weren't you?
Yes.
And perhaps if we can have tab 175. It's in both folders.
Whoops. Yes.
Now, you recognise that as a letter from Father Peters again to Bishop Manning,
Yes.
and this is dated the 25th of November.
Yes.
Did you see that letter either before it was sent or soon after?
No.
The first time you saw it was in relation to
this inquiry. Yeah.
this inquiry? Or...
Oh, the Whitlam inquiry, mate.
Thank you. Now, the first paragraph and the second paragraph, I take it, are accurate as to what happened? Yes?
Reasonably accurate, not absolutely.
Well,
That's true. Brian Lucas explained to John Farrell.
no, I'm talking about the first 2 paragraphs, not the numbered paragraph.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, yes, yes.
Thank you. And then, see, he indicates that it's an outline of what took place. He's not suggesting it's a verbatim account, is he?
No, an outline.
And he says the meeting finished at 9:40, so it was a 2-hour meeting.
That's what he says. I'm not going to dispute it.
Thank you. Now, this meeting followed the end of the previous meeting where Farrell said he was going to go away and think about things, including laicization. So this meeting was to hear back from him.
Yeah.
That's right?
Including laissez, but to think about many things.
Certainly.
This whole 7 points. Yes.
Certainly. Now, in the first paragraph, he said that voluntary laicization, the 5-year plan, and including the voluntary return to secular living and therapy, was not acceptable to him.
Not acceptable to?
That's right?
To Mr Farrell?
Yes. And you understood that was the tenor of the meeting. He was rejecting what had been put to him at the previous meeting.
Yes. He'd gone away and thought about it and had said, no, I'm not going to agree to any of that, or most of it anyway.
And then there's reference to what Father Lucas explained to him.
Yes.
And then there's further reference to the harm to the priesthood and the harm to John Farrell.
Yes.
And that was referenced in the previous letter as well.
Yes.
And then Father Lucas emphasised that there were young men out there who could still come forward and lay charges through civil proceedings. Do you see that there?
Yes, I saw that, yes.
Father Lucas said that at the meeting.
Look, I don't recall, but I read it there.
You accept it as an accurate count by Father Peters as to what Father Lucas said?
What Brian actually said at the meeting, I don't know. I would think he would have said, and because I can recollect the tenor of the meeting, he said, you know, there could be other men out there, not there are other men out there.
Well, again,
I don't know.
Father, you're speaking some 24 years after the event.
You're absolutely right. I'm
and
not
this
disputing
letter
that.
is days after the event.
I'm not disputing that, but having spoken to Brian, more recently about around the Four Corners matter, and asked him very definitively, did you recall Farrell making an admission? He said no.
And that, I think you've given
This is not consistent with that, if you follow what I mean.
Well, let's just take that in pieces. Have you spoken to Father Lucas before you've given evidence in these proceedings?
No.
So the last time you spoke to him about these matters was around Four Corners? Is that right?
Well, I've spoken to him a number of times about this matter. No, I have not gone through this letter with him at all.
Now, you have given evidence earlier that the first occasion, or the first of one or two occasions you spoke to Father Lucas, you said he said to you no admissions were made. That's right?
That's right.
And then we went yesterday to other occasions where what he had said differed from that. That's right?
Slightly, yes.
So as you understand the material that's been put to you, Father Lucas gave more than one account as to what he recalled being said at the meeting.
Well, I think it's a bit strong to say more than one account. He from time to time, he qualified no admissions.
So in relation to what's in paragraph 2, you accept that this is Wayne Peters' honest account as to what he recalled being said at the meeting a few days before the letter.
I'm not going to dispute that that's what he recalled.
Father Usher, is this a summary of the position? That you had this series of meetings and ultimately actions were taken. All of that occurring in 1992. Then Four Corners turns up 20 years later. And in anticipation that Four Corners would allege that the three of you, that is Lucas, Usher and Peters, received admissions from Farrell, you had to and did talk to each other about what your response would be to that assertion. Is that the first step?
we did, I did, I don't know what the others talked about. All I did was ring them both and say, do you recall? Because all we knew at the moment, at that time.
You talked to each other about...
Very brief conversation.
Maybe. What you didn't realise, and Father Lucas didn't realise, and it would seem that Father Peters didn't remember, was that there was actually a written record of these meetings.
You're absolutely correct.
Made at the time the meetings occurred.
You're absolutely correct.
But all of you had put yourselves in the position where you had publicly asserted, through the Archbishop or through the Cardinal, that no admissions had been made. Correct?
It's correct. I would just say that's what I honestly believe.
I'll leave that to one side at the moment, but you were in the position where you had given information to the Cardinal about your combined recollection, which was that no admissions were made.
That's correct.
And then, to your surprise, letters emerge recording the contemporaneous record of what actually did occur.
That's correct.
And your recollections are not consistent with those letters.
That's correct.
But you felt obliged to continue, did you, to assert what you asserted?
No, didn't feel obliged. That's what I honestly believed, Your Honour.
You see, if you didn't continue to make that assertion, the Cardinal would be seriously embarrassed, wouldn't he?
That wasn't a particular concern of mine, but I didn't just stick to a story simply because the Cardinal had said something. That's not true. But what I can say is I only stayed consistent to my story because, honestly, that's what I believed.
And is it right to assume that each of you have had discussions with each other or others about whether or not you might be criminally liable?
No.
In the circumstance where admissions were made?
No, we didn't have those discussions.
And you didn't go to the police?
No.
You've never had a discussion with anyone about that possibility?
I've had discussions with with lawyers.
Yeah.
But
about that possibility?
Yeah, but not with Wayne Peters at the time, but Paul Wayne died. Nor have I had discussions about to Brian Lucas about that.
But you've talked about it with your own lawyers?
Yes. When I became aware of it, yes. That's fair enough, isn't it?
I'm not suggesting otherwise. I just want to get the sequence of events correct.
Yeah, sure. But that's much more recently.
It's also the case, Father, that if you didn't continue to make the assertion that no admissions were made, your reputation as a person who stood out perhaps from others in the church about going to the police would be affected.
No, I can't agree with that, with respect.
Coming back to the letter, can I suggest that what is said in paragraph 2, attributed to Father Lucas, is consistent with what Father Peters said in his first letter? Accept that?
Accept that.
And similarly, in relation to paragraph 3, where John Farrell indicated that he was fearful that if he was laicized or no longer seen to be a priest, the chance of the young men he had offended against bringing civil charges against him was greater than if he remained a priest. Now, that is also consistent with the fact of admissions being referred to in the first letter, isn't it?
It is.
And then continuing down, he said, this is Farrell's recorded as saying, he indicated that he had heard that the reason the families of the victims didn't bring charges back in 1984 was because they didn't wish to publicly hurt the church by prosecuting a priest. See that? And that's consistent, isn't it, with him making admissions at the first meeting in relation to what happened in Moree in around 1984.
It reads that way, yes.
And then you set out as having explained that the hurt to the victims in these situations was particularly painful because of the breach of trust. Now, that was a view you held very firmly then, isn't it?
Yes.
And you still hold very firmly.
Yes.
and you are then recorded as saying you believe that there was less chance of him being further prosecuted if he was not a priest than if he continued to be seen in the public forum as one. Now, that's because your view of the victims, of the view that victims would take, that they'd be appalled if he was still a priest and therefore more likely to take action. Is that right?
Yeah, but could I say, when I read this recently, that's not the way I did say that, something like that, but I would have been talking generically. You know, I would have said something like, you know, when a priest has allegations or accusations made against him, he is stood down, but he remains a priest. And some priests go for laicization. But I would have said, my experience is that if you remain a priest, you remain a priest. If you are laicized, it doesn't mean people are not going to come forward, if anyone needs to come forward, just because you're now not a priest. Am I making sense?
Yes, no, I understand.
Yeah.
Now, further down that same paragraph, there's reference to Father Lucas agreeing that no one could give any guarantees that the victims would not bring charges in the future. That's similar to what you've been saying.
Yes, and I would have, I could say my recollection is, but I accept everything you're saying here, that my recollection might be faulty, but I'm sure Brian was speaking generically too. In other words, he would have been saying things like, you know, no one can give a guarantee to anyone, not just Farrell, that victims would not, if there are other victims out there, wouldn't bring charges. That's what I'm saying. I can't speak for what Brian thought or recalls, but I would have thought that's what he would have.
But you accept that that could be read as being consistent with the first.
Oh, absolutely. I'm not denying that.
Coming down to paragraph 5, there's reference to the options being offered, and again there's reference about halfway down to the possibility that the young men who had been offended against might have to be contacted in a canonical process was mentioned. Do you see that?
I see that.
Now, in order for that possibility to be able to be realised, one would need to either know the names or have access to information about the names. That's right?
I'd agree.
And that is entirely consistent with Father Peter's first letter, isn't it?
Yes. I'm not quite sure what he meant by that. Remembering I didn't see this letter till some years later. I'm not sure what Wayne meant. It doesn't make any sense to me, actually. The offended against might have to be contacted in a canonical process, was mentioned. I don't know what he means by that.
Well, is it the case that in a canonical process, that process may be benefited by having accounts from those offended against?
I don't think so. But look, I'm not a canon lawyer, but I don't think that if there are victims out there that they are used as, what would you call it, supporting evidence for laicization.
But if a priest is alleged to have misbehaved such that a canonical process is commenced, don't you need evidence to prove, or otherwise, the misbehaviour?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, in relation to child sexual...
But I stand to be corrected on this, not being a canonist, but I don't think the Church would go and talk to victims and put them through that sort of harassment just to get a chap laicized. That's what I'm saying. Look, I'd have to do some more research on that, but I don't think that's what the canonists would want to do.
I'm sure no one would want to do it, But if that's the
I don't
issue,
think they do or they would.
so the church would just let it pass, would it? How would it deal with the situation?
Well, my understanding is they would have evidence from a source. Maybe a matter's been reported to the authorities. Maybe a victim has come forward and made a statement, and the church has that all in writing. That would be used. But what I'm disputing is that Wayne is suggesting there that somehow the church personnel would go and interview the poor victims. I don't think that's correct. That's all. I don't want to make a big point of that.
Well, it only refers to a possibility, doesn't it?
Yes, that's right.
It could be read as a threat to Farrell.
It could be.
Now, coming over to paragraph 17. Now, what's recorded there is John Farrell indicated that other people had supported him in not seeing the same seriousness in the situation as the committee saw. You see that there?
Yes.
And that's consistent with documents we talked about yesterday, where he had, in a quite calculating way, sought to engage others in support against Bishop Heather and Manning.
Yes.
Now, you're then recorded as having asked if those people or these people knew the full story. And John Farrell said they did. John Usher stated that it was understood that only Farrell, Father Lucas, yourself and Father Peters and Bishop Manning knew the full extent of the story at this stage. And John Farrell said that those people were indeed the only ones who knew the full story. Now, that's attributed to you.
Yes.
You said that.
No.
He's got it wrong.
Yes.
Notwithstanding, it was a few days after the meeting.
That's all I can say. It's not something I would have said, Miss Vanessa. And I don't know what this full story means. I don't know what he means by that.
Well,
but anyway, I can say no more than that.
You see that Bishop Manning is part of that
I did.
paragraph,
yes.
Isn't there?
Yes, and that file note you showed me yesterday, of course it surprised me, but it's quite true that Bishop Manning knew a much fuller story than I knew.
And you accept that Bishop Manning clearly knew more than you did about Farrell at stages prior to this meeting. That's right?
That's right.
That phrase could suggest that, in fact, Fathers Lucas and Peters and you knew what Bishop Manning knew.
It could suggest that, but that is definitively untrue.
Why do you say definitively? Because the bishop's note would be consistent with what Father Peters says was discussed at the first meeting.
Your Honour, all I can be is as honest as I can. I knew nothing about what Bishop Manning knew until yesterday.
I understand that.
Yes. So I can say I didn't know.
But Bishop Manning's note, what he in that note says he knew, is consistent with what Father Peters said was discussed at the first meeting.
I'm not disputing that.
So to say that Bishop Manning definitively knew more than you all did doesn't sit with that proposition, does it?
Yes, I didn't know what Farrell had said to Manning. I honestly didn't.
That's maybe true too. Anyway, I'll leave it there.
Now, you commented to Mr. Whitlam in relation to this paragraph, and perhaps if we can have that on the screen, tab 8, and I think it should still be close by.
Yes.
So if you can turn to page 27.
Okay. Yes.
And again, you say at line 10, you can't recollect that and you don't know what he means by the full story. And And then further down...
I just said that, I think.
Yes, you did. Yes, and that's what you told Mr Whitlam. And coming down to line 23, you say there he sort of talked about many things that would be wrong if he did them. But to actually hear him say he actually did them was, I think, difficult to detect. Now, by difficult to detect, you mean that your interpretation of them was that he didn't do them, and you accept that others could have interpreted them as admissions?
Certainly, Father Peters, yes.
Thank you. Now, can I turn to another topic with you, Father, and that's in relation to the Jared Magella. You understand?
Yes, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
I thought you were turning to another topic about this matter.
Of course, I can understand why you thought that.
Sorry.
Perhaps if we'll help you remove those.
Yes, I see a bundle here that's marked Jared Magellan's.
I don't have a bundle.
Can you bear with me a sec?
I beg your pardon?
I said, can you bear with me
Certainly.
a second?
I'm interested in your bundle, I have to say, Father.
I thought I saw something here. No, I don't have something.
No?
But anyway, go ahead and...
Now, you would recall, well, I suspect, the events of the early 1990s in relation to the Society of St Jared Magella.
Yes, I recall what I was involved in, yes.
And you remember that there were various allegations of misconduct in relation to one or more of the brothers?
Yes, and one in particular.
Who was subsequently convicted?
I'm sorry, one in particular allegation, that's what I was saying, yes.
Thank you. And there was an inquiry that Bishop Heather commissioned in May 1993 by two canon lawyers?
That's correct.
And then there was various... I beg your pardon?
That was Father Austin, I think, and Father
Austin and Father
Blaney, yes. They're both canonists.
Yes. And then there were people who were removed from the ministry. And then there was a further complaint made in December 1993 alleging ongoing abuse by they're called brothers, aren't they? Brother Sweeney, that was in relation to a child. That is, the victim was 16 at the time.
That's correct.
And then you were commissioned to conduct an inquiry in relation to that allegation.
That's correct. Right.
And that was in January 1994.
Yes.
And you provided your report in February 1994.
Yes.
And Bishop Heather then stood Brother Sweeney down. That's as you understand it?
Yes, I wouldn't be aware of the time frames. Could I just make it clear that the Brothers of St Jared Magella existed in the Diocese of Parramatta. I, by this time, am a priest of the Archdiocese of Sydney.
You were asked to do it because of your knowledge of child sexual assault and clergy,
yes,
your brothers.
And Bishop Heather knew me well.
Did you talk about Farrell at any time when you were doing this with Bishop Heather?
Oh, no.
Now, the report you provided was a report not made public by you, but provided to the
bishop.
To the bishop. And I take it in that report you were satisfied, to whatever degree you needed to be, that Bishop Sweeney had misconducted himself in relation to that child.
Father Sweeney, no, I wasn't.
Father Sweeney, sorry.
I wasn't convinced because he denied it. He said that yes, he had had sexual relationships with that man as an adult, but he denied having a relationship with him when he was a boy, and also had all sorts of evidence that they were living in different houses and all that sort of thing.
What conclusion did you draw?
I drew a conclusion that he made no admissions on that occasion, but I wrote the report to Bishop Heather in such a way that he needed to look into it further, take it very seriously.
Did you recommend what he should do?
No, but I did follow up on what should be done. I remember clearly ringing Father McGuckin in the Diocese of Parramatta and saying what had been done about that specific allegation, and he told me the matter was now being investigated by the police.
And that was when?
I was a few days after my interview, after I wrote my report, sent my report off. I was very concerned that someone in the Parramatta Diocese, specifically the Bishop, should do something, and he obviously did.
Did you consider during or when you completed the reporting Brother Sweeney or Father Sweeney to the police?
He had, as my report says, he denied everything to me, but I was very concerned that the matter be investigated. I hadn't spoken to the victim, or to the alleged victim, and someone needed to do that in more detail.
But it must have been the case that you were engaged with other priests or brothers where they had denied the allegation and nevertheless you went to the police. Is that right?
Yes, yes, that's correct.
You didn't need an admission in your mind to
I
go to
didn't
the
need an
police.
admission, but I would have had spoken to a victim or a member of the victim's family and would have believed them and had some firm evidence, but I hadn't spoken to the man who made the allegations at the time. But it all happened, you know, he was spoken to, I believe, and the matter was reported to the police. The outcome was quite, in my mind, satisfactory.
Because the fellow was convicted.
Well, the matter was investigated by the police. That's the first step.
When did you understand it was reported to the police?
I understand it was reported to the police shortly after my report was received, and I think Sweeney was arrested about a month later.
Who reported him to the police?
As I told you, I spoke to Father McGuckin and he told me it had been reported to the police.
And the purpose of speaking to Father McGuckin was in part to find out if it had been reported to the police?
Yes, and also because I was very concerned about it. I was afraid at the time that what's his name, Sweeney, would be kept on, because I understand that after the report by Blaney and Austin, there was a recommendation that Sweeney be, stood aside from his role, and that didn't happen. And I was anxious now that it should happen.
Thank you. Can I show you a letter? Copies. Perhaps if we can provide copies to the designers and... Now, this is a letter to Professor Lisinski.
Yes.
In relation to a psychological assessment of Brother Sweeney and somebody else, dated the 20th of April 1994.
Mm-hmm.
That was a couple of months, I think, after you reported.
Yes.
Do you see at the bottom there's initials?
They're my initials, yes.
How did your initials come to be on it?
It's a letter from me to Dr. Blazinski.
I see. So you're the author of the letter.
Yes.
Thank you.
There doesn't seem... I've seen this recently. Doesn't seem to be a second page anywhere.
No, you don't recall there being a second page?
Probably would have been. That letter doesn't finish properly.
Well, perhaps if those who produced it to us can either produce a second page or indicate there is no second page. That would be useful. And this letter of yours, it says in the last paragraph, and it's on the screen, it notes that Brother Sweeney is now being interviewed by the police in the wake of the allegations by the former member whom he discussed with you. Now, I don't quite understand that sentence. Father, in the wake of allegations by the former member, so that's someone other than Sweeney.
Yes, it's the...
Whom he, being Sweeney, discussed with Dr. Brzezinski. Is that how that's to be read?
Yes, I think that's correct.
So you're recording to Dr. Brzezinski that the matter was in the hands of the police?
Yes.
And that was based on your discussion with Father McGuckin?
I believe so, yes.
And I'll tender that letter, Your Honour.
That'll be Exhibit 4410.
Thank you. I have nothing further, Your Honour.
Does anyone else have any questions? Anyone else?
No, I have some too.
Well, we might take them. You have some.
I'm presently informed.
Sorry?
Not as I'm presently informed, but I'll await.
Right. I think we might take the morning adjournment and then we'll take questions.